Hey everyone, this is Liz Barry and a great cast of characters. Just getting started with April's open hour on learning. And we are going to wait until about 1:05 to get started. So stay tuned and we'll have all the panelists by then. Thanks. Hi everyone, this is Liz just popping in to say that we're working to get our last presenter online, and I'm on the phone with her right now, as you can see. And if you can please hold tight, we can't wait to start, but we don't want to start without Beryl. So thanks everyone. It'll just be in about another minute. Okay. Hi, folks. We are. It's very unfortunate, but we are not going to be joined by Beryl today,
Oh.
and I am sorry about that. We did our best. Um, so the original concept for this open hour was to bring together people with interesting perspectives on learning, the kind of learning that happens within public labs, and how public labs relates to the broader world of education that surrounds it. So there are some really great people here today. I'll do a short introduction of myself and then hand it off to the speakers. Um, my name is Liz Barry. I'm Director of Community Development here in Public Lab, one of the original co-founders. And I'm very much concerned with how concepts, skills, and attitudes get exchanged in public labs, online and offline, um, in person versus in mailing lists. And I'm fascinated by the diversity of ways that is happening. So I'm glad for today's chat. Let me hand it to Bronwyn.
Okay, I'm Bronwyn. I work as a librarian, so I'm really interested in how sort of people deal with knowledge and sort of the networks and the tools that people use to kind of learn and share information as they're sort of transforming it into knowledge. So, yeah, I guess I've been involved with the public lab for a couple years, and yeah, I guess I'll leave it there for now. Can you hear me?
Great. That was great.
Okay.
So to Cindy.
Um, well, I'm the other side of the Atlantic Ocean. Um, by day, I'm a PhD student at University College London, where I look at trying to understand do-it-yourself practices. So, learning by doing. And so obviously this topic is very interesting to me on an everyday basis for my work. And so by night, I'm a public lab organizer, but I also run other kinds of workshops and activities through a group called Citizens Without Borders. And I have learned um, to use some of the concepts and ideas and practices from public lab to apply them and use them and share them with people in Citizens Without Borders for other purposes beyond science and technology.
Great. Ned.
There. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm Ned Horning. I work at the American Museum of Natural History in New York City. I actually live in Vermont, but the museum is in New York City. And my specialty is remote sensing and photo monitoring. With public labs, most of my work is revolved around the camera work, the NDVI cameras. I've done some of the calibration work. I have some software to help people process those images. And in general, I just have an interest in kind of the link between the science and other people. I work in the conservation sector, and it's pretty much the same sector that Public Labs is interested in. So I like to work at that intersection of kind of the professional scientists and citizens, or people interested in science but not necessarily with the background in it.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
So when I originally brought this group of people together, I was very interested to have a diversity of points of view, really. Someone, to have someone who's come to Public Lab to access expertise and involve expertise in their pursuit of goals. Also to have another point of view from someone who's come to offer expertise and is actually finding themselves offering support to people learning inside of Public Lab. We're going to conduct this session, we're going to do a quick round of questions, very simple, starting, and here's the first one. If we can go in order, and please share a short anecdote of a time when you were part of an exchange of concepts, skills, or attitudes. And Ned, can we start with you?
Sure. Well, I mean, I've had lots of interactions. Most of my interactions with people have been related to the software that I developed to process these NDVI images or color infrared images. And I don't. This isn't a specific case, but it's kind of a summary of several. And I really enjoy these interactions. When people come up with a question, because it helps me develop the software so it's more useful for other people. One of my concerns is that I develop the software, people try it, and then they don't know how to use it, or something isn't working properly, and they just never let me know. So it's these emails mostly. Correspondences that really help me understand what the community needs and what they want, and it helps me address those needs. And I really enjoy that. But if I don't have that correspondence, I really don't have that opportunity. So that's not a particular anecdote maybe, but it's sort of a summary. But it was brief.
Could you share like a particular interaction? Like what's actually, what does someone do? Like they download your software tool, and how does that work?
Well, I'd say that a common email is, I downloaded your tool, I followed your guide, and it's not working. When I do this step, I get this error message. Can you help me out? And sometimes it's was a misunderstanding in the guide, so I can help improve the guide, or maybe they've actually found a bug. But a lot of it's people that are having trouble running the software. And occasionally they'll say it would be really nice if you could add some geotagging, for example. Or if you could carry the geotagging over. I'm capturing these images, they're geotagged images, but when I process an NDVI image, it no longer has the coordinates. And is there some way to do that? So that's more of a feature type request.
Okay, great. Cindy, could I get you to share an anecdote of exchanging concept skills or attitudes, maybe in some of the workshops you lead? And unmute, please.
Yeah, sure. Okay, well, as I was saying in the introduction, I guess without really meaning to have built a bridge between the practices of public lab and other kinds of wider applications of the public lab ethos, especially this idea that everyone has something to contribute, and bringing out this curiosity and capacity for people to do something and share something in many different ways. So when I guess the story that I have is not when you asked for, but it actually sticks in my mind a lot, and it's when I've met Eamon Deagle many times from New York in the Guanas Canal, and I learned a lot from him, his stories, from having lots of teas and walking around looking for ghost streams, and I think that by him sharing his stories, I learned about the way that he reflects his methods, and what the stories that he tells me also say about him. And so one of the things that I really liked was, the way that he has figured things out, and the way he's developed this CSI method for finding these ghost streams, and those things are quite relevant for me to pass on to other people, because it's not a set method. It's a different way of conceptualizing and gathering information and connecting dots and different sources. And so in the workshops that I do, for example, I try to bring that out. So I don't, when I do for example, one of the workshops is called Explore of the World. I don't teach people how to do science. We rather engage in inquiry, and like Eamon does, you just go out there and explore, and with the wonderment and eyes kind of wide open and listening to stories and imagining things, you can learn new things and spark interest in your environment. So the connection of those experiences with Eamon to actual practical experiences happens quite a lot in the work that I do, and it's just because we've gotten to know each other, obviously as members of Public Lab, but also a deep connection as people and as friends, I guess, through our work.
Okay, great. So a combination of story-based, kind of coming at the world with a fresh curiosity and inciting your own curiosity. You've learned like that, and you have created experiences for other people like that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. Bronwyn.
Yeah, I mean, I think about sort of my own learning process a lot as I'm sort of thinking about this question. And I remember one of my first great teachers was somebody that I sort of found when I was in college, who was not one of my professors, but who was my boss at the job where I was working. And I was working as a carpenter in a wood shop, and it took me about 6 months to start asking questions about what it was that I was doing, because it took me about that long of sort of interacting with this stuff every day before I started to really kind of get it together enough to understand how to ask a smart question about what I was doing. And I work now in a library and in academia. I work with students that are pretty sort of non-traditional group of students for academia. So we've got folks that are coming out of sort of pretty tough public school backgrounds, and people of different ages who are coming to college for one reason or another. So I'm in a place where the students and teachers are pretty culturally different from one another, and sort of working with students sort of as an information specialist and as somebody who's sort of teaching them to start doing research and engage with the information that's around them, and to sort of start asking their own questions about the world that they live in is really interesting, because I think not only is that learning process really iterative, but the teaching process is also, and I don't always really know how to work with people until they start asking me questions and sort of letting me know where they're at and what they're not understanding. So it's interesting. I look a lot at different kinds of pedagogies. I'm somebody who needs to kind of get my hands dirty and start sort of fooling around with stuff before I get really comfortable with it. And so, the public lab is a great place for me. But, I also know that there, when you talk about sort of the learning process, and when you talk about teaching styles, you're talking about different things when you're talking about kids a lot of the time than you are when you're talking about adults, but I think it's also one of the things that's just really interesting to me is sort of how the public lab, or how we as public lab can kind of come together to kind of navigate the sort of the sharing and the building of knowledge, given sort of how diverse our community is, or how diverse we want our community to be. And I think that's definitely still a learning process for all of us. It certainly is for me. So.
Great. Could you maybe give us a specific anecdote?
Yeah, I mean, I think not so much a specific, a one specific thing, but I do a lot of one-off instruction where I'll work with a class for, a couple hours, and then they're pretty much out of my life. And it's always really interesting to me. So I teach classes, but I also sit at a reference desk in the library. So, every once in a while, some of those students will trickle back, and sort of the follow-up questions they have tend to be really interesting and really revealing about, their interpretations of things that we discussed in class. A lot of times it just we're sort of having a conversation, and in the classroom I'm sort of feeling like it's going one way, but then when I talk to them later, I realize that we were both talking about completely different things. And having different modes of communication and sort of making space for different ways to interact, I think is really important. So yeah.
Okay, great. So the next question is, how do we incorporate different learning styles and backgrounds with different sorts of expertise into the practices we bring to public lab? And with a special bonus part of the question about jargon, because jargon, like the words specific to your field, whatever that may be, education itself or a particular scientific discipline, has the use of jargon ever created opportunities, making it easier for people to work together, or possibly issues in an exclusionary or obstructive sense? Who would like to take that first? Ned smiles.
I guess I'm happy to start. I think there is certainly necessity for jargon. I mean, it's if you want to learn a certain skill, or especially a certain discipline, a certain jargon that's just kind of the basics. If you want to follow that discipline, you really need to pick up on some of the jargon. But it can also be a stumbling block. I think that's the ideal, is to work out some sort of balance, and that's something. Since I am trying to do this bridge between science and practitioners, jargon is a big part of that. So I do try to simplify. You have to draw the line somewhere, and there's not a nice, clear place to draw that line. I don't know if but I'm sure I don't always do it well. Sometimes it's a little bit too much too jargony. Sometimes it's you end up spending so much effort trying to explain something, whereas if people would understand a single term, it would be a lot easier. So it is something I struggle with, and I think it's working with a balance. It's not to use jargon or not to use jargon. It's how to make it appropriate for your audience, and also what you're transferring from and to, I guess.
Great. So a kind of a step zero conundrum.
A what? I'm sorry?
Kind of a step zero. What is the step zero? Are we off and running using specific terms, or are we having people meeting us with different kinds of backgrounds?
And I think there's some. I mean, there's a lot of back and forth going on. I mean, this is kind of the water cooler type conversations after a class or something. You're talking to people, and they say, "Well, I really didn't understand when you were talking about this. You were using this word, but I have no idea what it means." So I think it's those informal discussions that helps to, enlighten you a little bit on where that jargon line should be drawn.
And I think that's a really interesting point, what you just said, that in informal discussions, we can help move that line, adjust the jargonometer that we're using. In those cases, and I believe, I'm going to argue for that, the open discussion mailing list and the public lab notebook that we all share in the form of the public lab website opens up space for that. Is it jargony to use the word calibration, but to use a kind of a way for people to enter the conversation at all levels. Would anyone else? I just remembered an anecdote I'd love to share from Beryl on this point, but I'd love to hear from Bronwyn and Cindy first.
Oh, hi, sorry. Yeah, I mean, I one of the things that sort of made me become a librarian was that I really love specialized language. I love how that sort of helps people organize ideas and sort of be clear and direct about sort of communicating complicated ideas. But I also sort of recognize, the ways that language can be used to sort of exclude people's participation and to sort of be used to kind of identify who's in a group and who's not in a group, and all of that stuff. And I think that it's all about sort of trying to find, again, it's a balance. You want to sort of, you don't want to be cute and make up new names for things just because you can, or just because you think that the real name for something is too hard or complicated for somebody else. And I talk about this a lot, when I'm in the library, is nobody knows what a database is, but, if you call it something else for the website, that it, creates a whole kind of cascade of other problems when it comes to sort of clarity and things like that. So I think that there's sort of, you need to sort of figure out, on the one hand, we're all kind of teaching each other, and I think that it's fair to expect people to kind of, want to learn what things are called and sort of work, work that way, but also that, to not speak over people just because, it's possible to, or because, you think that maybe everybody's up to speed when they're not. I know that I do a lot of instructional design, and so there's this one, there's design thinking, which people may sort of be familiar with or not familiar with. It's sort of a learning theory, but that's one that sort of is, people are especially talk about that when they talk about hands-on learning. Mm-hmm. But just also really acknowledging the sort of bonds that make learning happen is, as we've already said in sort of the design thinking process, a lot of times what you start with are just sort of interviews and conversations and sort of some mind mapping and stuff like that, and it's not just a thing for kids, it's sort of people doing it all over the place. And I think that, sort of balancing out the formal and sort of informal language with sort of a mind towards sort of bringing people into the fold, I think, is meaningful. And then not shutting down, if somebody wants to sort of talk jargon to somebody else, that's also fine too. Not everybody needs to be sort of brought into every part of everybody's conversation. I think that there's, we're talking about expertise, and I think that it's important to sort of nurture that as well, and if that means that people with expertise need to go off and talk to each other for a minute, that's also fine. But I think just as a group, I think it's about finding where we want those lines to be, or sort of making sure that there aren't that the lines themselves are not so permanent.
Wow. Well, that was a flurry of really interesting concepts, Bronwyn. I want to thank you for that. I mean, just thinking of them for a moment. To your point about not making up new names to avoid very jargony terms, that is very interesting. And I remember that was at play with the public lab spectrometer. Now, I've had plenty of formal education in my day. However, I didn't know what a spectrometer was, and I did not relate to that word. However, as much as I might euphemistically call the spectrometer a rainbow reader, that's fine, you can laugh at me. In truth, learning the word spectrometer and being able to search and read through the background of literature created rungs on a ladder for me to learn. And really, if public lab is a place where people are going to gain new skills and being able to research their environment, I mean, there's the idea that you are gaining something, that you're starting somewhere and you're ending up somewhere else. And I think this is a very interesting point of view on not shying away from jargon, because those are essentially rungs on the ladder.
Yeah, I mean, and I think the word jargon itself, may not be the exact right word for everything that, all the language that we use. And just because I'm sort of, I might steer away from sort of inventing new words for things, it doesn't mean that I don't also think that we can't give things cool names. But yeah, in all of that, I do want to sort of I don't know, respect the intelligence of the people that we want to work with too, and the sort of the understanding that they sort of are coming and they're also interested in learning and sort of not, not being coddled necessarily. But maybe we can sort of talk more about that some other time too.
Yeah, and also about some of the other points. But let's hear from Cindy while we have her. Who's going to unmute?
Is it good now? Okay, my finger's cold, so it doesn't work properly. Yeah, the conversation about jargons, it has a lot of dimensions, as Bronwyn has kind of, feathered out. But I want to talk a little bit about this idea of expertise, and one of the reasons why I really enjoy interacting with people from the public lab community. And I think that for me, the thing to highlight about expertise is the way that it plays out in practice. So I think that what I really appreciate about public lab, at least as far as I've seen it, I haven't been part of everything, but it's the kind of leveled playing field for contributions from different people in the community. So, and I think it's part of the ethos of public lab, right? Like, as I was saying before, considering that everyone has some expertise to share, and that there might be, that there are multiple ways of contributing. So, and that there are barn stars for the different ways of contributing as well. So, I think that, while someone might have the degrees, the credentials, and the accreditations for some specific field, this doesn't necessarily define the value of their contribution, right? I think that someone who might not have those degrees or diplomas might actually have experience on the ground doing things and can contribute equally in a different way, and that's really key for the way that public lab functions. So obviously many of the members of public lab community do have degrees, they do have this accredited expert knowledge, and the community has benefited a great deal from those, obviously, and a lot of those people are greatly appreciated for that. However, I think that that the respect and appreciation of those people and their expertise comes more from the way that they share their expertise, and the way that the community builds and shares that, and the way they develop it and are able to communicate it face-to-face or in practice, rather than respect because it's backed by a credential. So another thing I appreciate about the public lab community, I think, is that although there's a lot of technical knowledge that is required for contributing perhaps to the building of software, for example, or making more technical contributions, I also think that the organizational skills that are required, to, for example, be a community organizer, or the sensibility, the awareness, and those other skills are not necessarily taught in school. They're not things that we learn from our degrees, but rather from our interactions with people, from workshops that we give, from really engaging with people, with our sleeves rolled up and really going in there. So I think it takes a lot of time to develop expertise and trust in this kind of expertise as well. And I think that the real problem with expertise comes when expertise of a certain kind becomes the body of quality control and defines what gets taken seriously. And when it comes to jargon, I really think that I really agree with what Bronwyn was saying. Not everything can be called jargon, because I think things should be called by their name, and not because a spectrometer says spectrometer all of a sudden, and it's not a common word, it's all of a sudden jargon. But when things get too technical, I think that they should be hyperlinked, they should be explained so that people, as in the public lab community most often do, teach themselves about it. And I think that public lab is that wonderful bridge between different kinds of knowledge and different kinds of words and different kinds of ideas and technical terms. And I think the key thing that I've seen in public lab is, like, unfortunately Beryl is not here, but I think she wrote in her contribution that we have to meet people where they're at, not where we want them to be, and we have to meet them in their own terms. So plain language, I think, is always the best way as well, but there's that fine balance for jargon.
Wow, thank you so much. Also for ending up with tipping your hat to Beryl, who I'd love to share a little more right now from what she's previously written in as we were preparing this discussion. But also I want to recognize what you said, that there are these workshop leading skills or community organizing skills that have been kind of quietly, tacitly maybe functioning in the public lab community, but we never created guides for them, and we never really articulated how important that was. We made guides for building tools and going out and doing research, but not until really the last few months have we focused on making guides for how do you get your stakeholders together? How do you decide? How do you find out what you already know collectively and what you want to research before you're in the position of putting your boots on? So this is I just feel like that whole topic is a really important new direction for public lab as we, I don't know, hit our kindergarten years. I have some quotes from Beryl about jargon, and she wanted to specifically say that here's a quote from Beryl Thurman, who's the executive director of the North Shore Waterfront Conservancy. She says, "Everything about the environment, in terms of language, is alienating and oppressive, especially for people who have never associated themselves with being part of their environment. It is that way from all angles. It's that way with the environmental agencies and their policies. It's that way with the average person who has lived in an urban environment all their lives. It's that way with the businesses." So based on who we are, we use words that may allow us to understand our peers, but that language may not necessarily transfer over as well to outside groups. She goes on to say that a key point is frequently lost in translation, and just as frequently, a person or a whole group of people may just be too embarrassed to say, "I don't know what that word means, and I have no idea what it is that you just said." And maybe they also don't want to hurt the speaker's feelings by pointing out that they're not speaking in an accessible way. She also writes that she blames the spin doctors for this, which I think is an interesting point. I actually remember George Orwell's essay about terminology and politics, and that very much kind of informs his doublespeak way of satire. I'm not sure if anyone else is familiar with that, but I think it's a good reference for us. Would anyone else want to jump back in on this topic? And also, if there's anyone watching, would you either like to type in a question in the chat, or perhaps follow the link that I pasted in in the chat to join our call live as one of the people talking in this video roundtable. All right, well, while people are thinking of questions, I would like to add, I'd like to contribute an anecdote also on behalf of Beryl. It actually relates to one of the first questions that went around, is that how have you found yourself interacting with, in the exchange of concept, skills, and attitudes? And Beryl said that as an environmental advocate working for environmental justice in her neck of the woods on Staten Island in New York City, a very important way that she works is to reach out to government agencies with scientific expertise on staff. For instance, connect with a scientist at NOAA and bring them along with her to explain the environmental realities to a local politician who otherwise is not listening to her. So I think that's a very interesting way of interacting with expertise, of leveraging different kinds of power. Yeah, I think there's a lot of interesting things in there for us to think about. Does anyone have any comments on that? Because I do have one little follow-up as well. What's been interesting to me, working with Beryl, who's primarily an offline community organizer, I believe Bronwyn and I have both gone and done kite mapping missions along the shoreline in Staten Island with her. But she's been very clear that while she is absolutely excited to access expertise through traditional government agencies, to access the expertise that is hanging around in the public lab, peer-to-peer community, she does not have time to kind of invest in almost what's become a lifestyle for some of us, of continual informal discussion about these concepts and about, moving these skills around. And she's quite clear that she's not interested, that she doesn't have time, that if it's not specific to exactly what she's working on, which is urgent, then she doesn't have time for peer production. And I'm wondering if anyone would like to share any anecdotes from their experience in any way related to that.
Mm-hmm. I think that it would have been great to I mean, I have a lot of questions for Beryl as well, and when I read her contributions to her answers to the questions that were set, it really opened up a door to a reality that I'm often not engaged with. It's like, the front line of really attacking and making change and dealing with very difficult situations. I'm quite far removed actually from that. That advocacy is not the kind of work that I do, and so obviously the work that she's doing requires a different setting of interaction, and I think I would feel like I would learn a lot more from her than she would probably, learn from what I do, just because of the rate at which she's doing it, with the drive and dedication and I guess and straightforwardness that she's doing it. So the fact that we can access, it sounds kind of horrible, it sounds like using her, but the fact that we can access people like her is not only a great inspiration, but it's a really great way for for people that I work with as well to share their stories so that they can see that work like this can be done and does get done, rather than just, you know, the news that we get that nothing gets done and that everything happens at high levels of decision making. That said, as Beryl pointed out, there are a lot of hindrances along the way, and jargon and the kind of like brick walls are things that she often has to deal with on a day-to-day basis. But I have to say, I do feel a little bit far removed from that reality, and it makes me feel like I live in a different kind of bubble. So I'm really grateful that that I'm able to learn from people like her and her work.
Well, we all have bubbles, and what's becoming, you know, interesting about Public Lab is that somehow through our combination of online and offline exchanges, and the fact that we're, you know, sometimes we're wearing community organizing hats, sometimes we're being organized, sometimes people with expertise are being asked a ton of questions, and sometimes you're the one asking questions. In this peer production soup that's really involved, that's evolved so far, I guess I'm excited about the diversity of modes of learning that we have. And I guess one of my kind of wrap-up thoughts as we're like 5 minutes before the hour is that we haven't in the past been as clear as we could be about the multiple ways that learning is happening in Public Lab and the multiple ways that expertise is moving through Public Lab. So the community organizing guides that Cindy mentioned, I'm super excited about. The points about diversity, yet clarity of language that Bronwyn brought up. You know, Ned's incredible generosity with being a major tool contributor and then offering, you know, support through these channels, no matter what kind of crazy questions come at him. I mean, that's I'm basically excited about supporting more than just guides on making tools now. I'm excited for future directions of Public Lab to really reflect the diversity of what's happening here. All right, and I'm going to be quiet because Bronwyn has a point that she wants to put in as a closer.
Oh. No, I was just adding a few things, just to sort of follow up on some of the stuff that I said. But I will also, I mean, I was thinking about sort of Beryl and her kind of keeping off the online sort of part of our world. And you know, I do think that as we're talking about educating, you know, I know that you know, I come to Public Lab as, you know, with a certain set of skills, and that I am in a lot of parts of my life an educator. So when I think about what I have to offer other people, you know, I think about sort of, you know, things that I can teach and things that I can share that way. But I also recognize that, you know, sometimes you're working with folks and their goal is not necessarily, you know, they need to use a spectrometer, but their goal is not necessarily to learn that much about spectroscopy. Their goal is to sort of solve their immediate problem. That I don't know, figuring out, you know, if we're working with sort of folks that we've found out there, you know, in the world, sort of how we sort of pool all of our various expertises to sort of make people's work and people's projects successful. You know, I know that not everybody sort of wants to sit down with me and sort of talk about how, you know, specialized vocabularies get developed, and that's great. Sometimes they just need it to kind of work for the thing that they're doing. You know, and I think that's great. But I don't know, moving forward, I'd love to start putting some stuff together about sort of different ways we could approach learning in collaboration.
I think that's really exciting, Bronwyn, and I think you brought up like something that we maybe could have said a little bit earlier, which is like, you know, one of the main moves Public Lab made early on is to get scientific equipment into the hands of people, not science toys and not science demos, but actual research equipment that you can use in the actual environment and start answering your questions. I think it's worth, nodding to constructionism for that. Seymour Papert has a big influence on why public lab is set up like that and the kind of curiosity he's talking about. But to your point, Bronwyn, I think we have now so much going on so many different levels, especially the pursuit of advocacy based on all this cool research that we've done, and trying to communicate this to other stakeholders, which is another kind of learning moment. Yeah, generally, we have a lot of scaffolding to do at this point, which is exciting.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I guess another thing that sort of just crossed my mind is also, I know in New York City, which is we're a pretty forward-thinking city. I think we're still at somewhere around 30% of households not having broadband access. So depending again, we have lots of sort of conversations about how we teach people, and sort of recognizing that going into the mailing lists and going and sort of following up on stuff is not always a quick solution to people who might also benefit from using tools. I know we sort of talked about it a little bit when we were talking about physical paper guides that we were maybe going to send or not send out with stuff. So yeah, I mean, I think, I don't know, it's something that's on my mind.
Well, great. This roundtable is meant to kind of open up some of the current thinking, remember where we've come from, and maybe put us in a good place for some future work, future directions. So all these conversations will be ongoing, both in person and on the public blog mailing list and on the website, like we do. And we are almost at the top of the hour. So would anyone like to share any final thoughts about this and related topics?
I would like to say something, but I feel like maybe Ned hasn't said as much as we have.
No, please
Go ahead.
So at one of the workshops that I did back in 2013 with Shannon and Matt, who came here to London, we made kites, and then we flew them, and we learned about spectrometry. We did the whole thing. And one of the people who participated in all of the workshops, I think there were 5 workshops in total, at the end of it, I interviewed him, and he told me after the interview, he said, to be honest, I don't really have a use for these things. I'm not really gonna go out there and fly a kite or do the spectrometry thing. But what I have learned actually is that if I ever needed to, or if I ever wanted to do something like this, or something like it, I know I can. And I think that was really powerful. It kind of embodies for me what DIY it is. Owning your experiences and going beyond what you've been given. Yeah.
Thank you. So I just we are going to wrap, but one more question. The Etherpad is back up, and we got a question that I'm going to type into the chat room right here, for the chat on this Hangout. So I believe possibly from Matthew Lippincott, he says, documenting for peer production and collaboration is a major chore. Sometimes it pays off, but a lot of the time I just find it taking up time, and I don't get the sort of helpful feedback I want. It pushes me to just do end-stage documentation rather than in-process documentation. And do you guys feel like that? This is a question really about, are we just delivering kind of final versions of things? Or are we actually publishing in our lab notebook in a way that gets us the feedback we need to keep going, in a way that makes it a collaborative process? Well, I'll add one more thing to that. Well, actually, I won't. I won't. Does anyone have thoughts on this kind of documentation?
I can certainly sympathize. When I kind of try to document a lot of the tools. My attitude is I just want to get the tool, make it available to people. I think oftentimes I don't put the time into the documentation that I perhaps should. My attitude is, if I make the tool available, people should appreciate it. If they can't use it, they'll contact me, which is really not appropriate. If I put a little bit more effort into the documentation, I think it would make it more accessible to people. But the reality is oftentimes you don't get the feedback. I wish people would write me and say, I didn't understand this section, or I tried this and it didn't work, or I did this and I got an error. But I think 9 times out of 10 people try something, it doesn't work, and they just say, well, it didn't work. And they tell all their friends it didn't work. And it might be something really simple to fix, but I don't know I won't know it's broken until someone tells me it's broken a lot of times. So it's a problem, and I'm not sure what the best solution is. So that could be a problem we could try to solve. I don't know, but it is an issue that we all have to work with.
I mean, that's a great articulation, and it really illuminates the flip side of the coin, which is that it's in very few people's culture, unless they're familiar with open source, that responding with a failed experience is a contribution. A failure feels negative, and we're always asking people to contribute, and it sounds like, oh, we've made a step forward, but there is quite a hurdle we run into with people not thinking that reporting on a failure is a contribution.
Mm-hmm.
Jeff and I posted a research note a few weeks ago, maybe a month ago now, saying that sometimes our workshops or our work is to get tools, to kind of amass all the current best ideas and get it to a final packaged product. Still open source, still modifiable, but yet get it to kind of a stable version and send that out for people to play with. But as soon as you do that, what that opens up is the opportunity for people to play and begin to hack further and change it and modify it and do something more experimental where the ends are maybe not quite as obvious and it's not quite towards getting reliable, replicable results. But this is a cycle, this sort of amassing and refining and packaging stage, which then goes back to an iteration and a playful and exploratory phase, and which generates yet more ideas that come back again and get packaged into kind of another stable release. I'm wondering, does anyone connect with that kind of way of, with that sort of tidally influenced development cycle in public lab? It's okay if not. Well, Matthew, I would love to speak directly with Matthew, but he is not directly in the call. So I believe we are going to wrap up now. And obviously, this is a hot topic. We talk about this sort of thing on the organizers list a lot. We do have an education working group where there's sometimes a lot of activity and sometimes not very much activity. And we'll keep talking about this topic on the main list. So for anyone who's invested in this, I look forward to continuing the conversation with you. And thank you very much, Cindy, Bronwyn, and Ned. Bye now.
For pulling this
Thanks, guys.
together.